Welcome to Season 1 of Garth and Sue Talk, a new series by Psych Sessions, where we bring up a topic of conversation and then we just riff. These are the water cooler conversations that you have with colleagues in your department. These are the chats you might have at the bar after a good day at a teaching conference. So, please pull up a seat as we talk about teaching. Sue Franz, welcome back. I am going to give you, you don't know what the topic is today. Actually, neither do I, because I'm going to give you a choice of topics today. And this doesn't mean we won't hit these other ones later, but I thought, let's go with whatever Sue's feeling. How does that sound?
That sounds good. We should do that more often.
So let's go with one of these. We could talk faculty workload, or we could talk community college, or we could talk about tilt. What would you like? Dealer's choice.
Those are all perfectly fine choices. I've been thinking a lot recently about faculty workload, especially here in the world where so many of us are doing remote teaching. That might be a fun one to tackle today.
Yeah, let's do that. I think that we've touched on it a little bit. I recall this perfect, what I think is just a perfect sentiment that many instructors probably are feeling, that you gave voice to in an article where you said that you realized at some point you were working harder than your students were working. And so we've touched on faculty workload a little bit, but of course there's lots involved in it. And we are in a pandemic as well.
We are indeed in a pandemic.
Yeah. So where do you want to start? What occurs to you, or what have you been thinking about most recently with faculty workload?
Some colleagues and I were just talking about this yesterday, actually, and thinking about how much longer everything seems to take right now in a virtual environment. And part of that is if you're teaching via Zoom, you got to handle students are having a hard time getting connected. You're having a hard time getting connected. Wait, someone's microphone doesn't work. And so it can take several minutes before you're actually ready to start into the content. And if you're teaching a 50-minute class, that's a significant percentage of the class. And some instructors haven't been grading stuff online. So they still had students turn in hard copies. And it probably is easier to read a hard copy, easier to write on a hard copy than it is to grade digitally.
Right. Yeah. So and one of the things that I pick up from what you're saying is that some of the decisions that we make can be in our best interest or not. And sometimes you actually don't know that. Sometimes it's just naivety. Like I remember being a younger professor and making some decisions where I just made a whole lot of work for myself and didn't know any different, or maybe thought it was the norm. And so.
That was one thing I learned a long time ago, that I don't trust myself, is what I learned. So if I'm going to make a change to a course, I run it by some colleagues first. I'm hoping that they can save me from me. And I've had those kind of conversations with other faculty, and they have this great idea about this major project, and it's scaffolded throughout, and the students are going to be submitting. And like, well, wait, have you thought about how much work that's going to be for you? So if you burn yourself out here this particular term, then you're not going to be worth anything to anybody next term.
Yeah. And I'm sure that some faculty think about their own workload before student workload, perhaps. But I think that, at least in our little world, we're probably thinking more about student learning primarily. And our intentions are good. And so we have these great assignments, this great, we're going to test out this new thing. But if you don't have that person, probably a more experienced person, or maybe just a number of colleagues who have a wide variety of experiences, I agree that you might be making some mistakes that are going to be hard to back out of once you put them into place. I'm actually seeing this with my daughter's elementary school education right now. I see that in teachers, and I hear it from teachers who are from friends who are teachers in high schools as well right now, because they don't have this online background. They are killing themselves trying to do a good job of teaching. And so I think this is the parallel to what we're talking about. And I know I've mentioned a few things already, but I know we need to talk about kind of teaching now during the pandemic, but this is part of the larger conversation of just like faculty workload in general.
I agree. I think that the pandemic, like it has with so many other things, has just magnified it. So any small thing, any small change that you're making now is really going to magnify into a much larger change. And of course, all of this is happening as parents with young children are trying to do all of this work from home. One of my colleagues has a 15-month-old baby, and she is going into the office twice a week, and fortunately has her parents who are able to drive up and from about an hour and a half away and stay with the child all day. So she's able to get some on-task time, but she recognizes how fortunate she is to have that. Just as I feel fortunate that what I'm dealing with at home are 2 dogs, which is, worst case scenario is I can put them in a kennel, and I understand that that's frowned upon with children.
Yeah, my daughter wouldn't like that very much, I don't think. It's tempting though. It's tempting. So we can talk kind of, on some level about, faculty workload. There are strategies, but I'd like to really get down to the kind of ideas that we maybe have or have practiced in order to make our workload not a killer. Because if we burn out, and we are in this in some ways in the customer service industry, right? We are in the social and customer service industry, and if we burn out, we're no good to our students at all. And I know that I think that you've talked about. I don't know if you've talked about it so much, but I've definitely seen self-care in your life and in your work-life balance. Okay, so let's talk about things that we have done that have been big wins, and maybe if we can think about the ones that haven't been big wins, that would be good too. So, any lessons that you've learned off the top of your head?
I want to acknowledge that I think that some people are going to be surprised to hear that you perceive me as having a good work-life balance, because I don't think that most people have that perception about me.
Oh, do you think I'm wrong?
I don't think you're wrong.
Okay.
I do it all with smoke and mirrors. So I show up in a lot of places, but I am very careful about how I spend my time. I'm even more careful these days about how I'm spending my time. So absolutely critically important. But I just want to acknowledge that for listeners who are familiar with some of my work and see my name in various places are probably going to be surprised to hear that I really, truly do have work-life balance.
Yeah. And I think that probably what we're going to learn here shortly is that you have a lot of hacks, and you said it as much, smoke and mirrors. And honestly, let me go to a memory I have. We worked together for many years. I remember you telling me once how I just talked to Elizabeth Loftus this morning. So now I'm thinking maybe my memory is not correct, but either I had a conversation with you or I just saw the way that you dealt with email. And I don't know if this has changed for you, but at one point in time, I just realized that you sent emails back very, very quickly. It's a practice that I've taken on, and I don't want the load of emails in my inbox of knowing that I need to get back to them. I may not have the perfect answer right now, but if I don't, I'm going to tell you that I don't have the perfect answer right now, but I'm going to get back. I don't want to sit with the waiting on my end. And that frees up a lot of space for me to start thinking about other things. So anyway, what is your email strategy? Because that's a big part of our workload.
It is. And some people get frustrated by email, that they feel like email is getting in the way of their work, but email is a large part of our work. It's one of our jobs. So what I can tell you right now is that I have 6 messages in my inbox. So here's the trick. I remember years and years ago, back when people had paper that they were dealing with. And one of the recommendations, like you got letters in the mail. Do you remember that?
It's been a while. Not really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And people used to send things like memos, which were actually on pieces of paper. It was a phenomenal time. So paper would show up and people would stick it on their desk, and then a new paper would show up and they'd stick it on their desk. And before too long, there's a huge pile of papers. The recommendation from the paper management experts was you grab a piece of paper once. You should only handle it once. So when you look at it, decide what you're going to do with it. If you're going to respond to it, respond to it. If you are going to throw it away, throw it away. If you're going to file it, but don't put it over here to look at later, because frankly, it's going to get buried and you're not going to look at it later. We do the exact same thing with email. I just did a workshop actually on email management last week. And one person in the workshop, I kid you not, had 88,000 messages in her inbox. And that's the highest. I've seen a lot of faculty inboxes, but that's the highest that I have ever seen. And by the end of the workshop, that email was all cleaned out. So here's my advice. If you think about this like your house, if you have thousands of, maybe not 88,000, but if you've got thousands or hundreds of messages in your email, you are a hoarder. You are hoarding those messages. Perhaps you're afraid to move them out of your inbox because maybe you might need them someday. Just like those old newspapers and old magazines that are starting to stack up in your living room. You're not going to need them someday. But here's the thing. You don't have to throw them out. We don't have to do that kind of an intervention. We can move them to storage. Now, with all your old newspapers and old magazines, I wouldn't recommend paying storage for that. But with email, you get free storage. So here's what you do. You take all of those, over in your folder area, there's a folder area in your email system. You create a folder called Old Email. You take all the messages in your inbox and you move them over to that old email folder. And then, so what we've just done is we've taken all the newspapers and magazines out of your living room, out of your living space. We don't want your living space cluttered. And we're going to move them into storage. Free storage. So you get them all moved over there. And then once you do that, take the last 2 or 3 days worth of emails, move them back into your main inbox. And now you get to deal with this very manageable number. So for some of them, you might just decide, I don't need this. You can delete them. If that makes you uncomfortable, move it to old email. If it is something you absolutely need to deal with and it's a quick thing you could do right now, go ahead and do it right now. If it's something that you're wondering, maybe I'm going to do something with this, say on Monday, then I recommend using a free service called nudgemail.com. NUDGE mail.com. So you can just take that mail message and forward it to Monday at nudgemail.com. And on Monday morning, that email is going to come back to you as a brand new message. That means that message that was just sitting in your inbox that you're not going to deal with until Monday, you can move that to the old email folder because it's going to come back on Monday anyway. So that way, all that you've got on your screen are things that you need to deal with right now.
Yeah. Well, and so there's two things going on here. One, you're dealing with a lot of things right now. If you're opening your inbox, you are prepared to deal with some stuff, and whether that's move it along or actually tackle it. And I have a similar process now. So in those folders where you have old emails, I also have 3 folders. One is it's tiered, so it's to do 1. To do 2, 1 being probably a weekly check-in on that folder, 2 being kind of a monthly. These are not as important. And then a waiting on folder where I have sent something out to folks and I am waiting on them for it. It might be a project or something that we're working on. But I just checked my inbox. And I too have 6 emails in there, and that's some that I just haven't seen yet this afternoon. But yeah, it does help. And maybe I'll ask you, how is this beneficial? How's this benefiting you?
I'm not spending so much time looking at email. If you've got dozens and dozens and dozens of email sitting in your inbox, when you start going through, maybe you start at the top, like, okay, I haven't read this. Okay. And then you start scrolling down and then you start getting into the old email. Well, now you've just spent a chunk of time reading through old email that you're never going to do anything with, or maybe you will. And that sucks up a lot of time. So your inbox, your working space, think of it as your working memory if you want. It shouldn't be cluttered up with having to go through stuff that you've already seen before. So deal with it, get it out, move on with your life. Yeah. And as part of that, I would also encourage people to switch the order so that your old messages are at the top and your new messages appear at the bottom. And that will help you stay focused on, here are the old messages. I got to do something with these, deal with them so that you're not always scrolling.
All right. As you said that, I don't know why I didn't do that, but I just switched it in my Outlook because it's so annoying to me the way I have it set up. So thanks. All right. So that's email. There's an administrative side. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Before we give up on the email,
yeah,
I'm a big fan of we just talked about this, of work-life boundaries.
Yep.
So for me, my work time is pretty much 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. And I can move that in either direction as needed, but pretty much 8 to 4 Monday through Friday, and then maybe Saturday morning if I need it. And email tends to be first thing in the morning. There are plenty of email experts who say, don't look at email first thing in the morning, because if you do that, you're going to get sucked into all this email and you don't get anything else done. But I would say that a large part of our job is responding to email. A lot of students communicate with us through email. So for me, it's important that I tackle email first thing in the morning. But I also, those things that can maybe wait, maybe I'll get to them by the end of the day. I'll probably let them sit until the end of the day when I don't quite have the brain power to do anything else, that, I can do a quick answer on this at 3:30, for instance. And if not, then I'll go ahead and nudge it. But at the end of every day, I try to have an inbox that has less than 10 messages in it.
Yeah. And as an aside, with that daily or those quicker responses, I think that there is a dependability that comes across. And I know that we can get sucked into like this could also maybe look like not having work-life balance or something like that. But I really can identify the people professionally, locally at my college, and then nationally as well. I know which people, if I reach out to them, they're going to have something back to me within the day, if not within the next couple hours. And it sure is. I think there's an efficiency to the system as well when people are working that way, because one person who's taking And not like faculty shouldn't take the day off or a couple days off, or they should be able to do whatever the hell they want. But it can really halt a process. So yeah. Okay. So emails, one part of it. Let's talk about the course design or classroom. I have definitely been in situations where I have assigned something and the amount of writing that I have assigned has been overwhelming to give students good feedback on feedback that I would feel good about. And sometimes students, they don't know maybe that they're not getting as good a feedback as they should get, but other times, definitely in my career early on, I was called out on it as well. So just because I didn't give them, they're doing all this work, they're not getting much feedback on it. Okay. So we love to assign things. We don't like the grading part. What do we do?
Stop assigning things.
Stop assigning things. It's that easy. Next.
There are a handful of options. At NITOP a few years ago, and my apologies to the person who presented this. I don't remember who this was. So if you know, please contact. If you're the person, please contact me, because I would love to thank you for this. One idea that this person had was 2-tiered grading. So in the first tier, it's bare bones. Here's the rubric. That's it. But then invite the students. If you'd like to have more detailed feedback, please let me know. And then I'll go in and write more detailed comments. So that way you're not writing detailed comments for the 2/3 of the class that's not interested in your detailed comments. That's just a waste of time. So this way you're giving the detailed comments to the 1/3 of the class who is interested.
That's exactly what I do too. I put it in my syllabus. I tell students that ahead of time so that they understand the way the course works. If they don't understand that that's the way it works, that becomes problematic. And so I take responsibility as an instructor to make sure that they understand how that works. And I do that in way of a syllabus quiz, essentially.
Sure. And my comments, we use Canvas, and after filling out the rubric in Canvas, I have a standard comment that is, if you would like more information about how your assignment was, something like that, then contact me. So there's a reminder in every assignment. You put it right into the rubric or into the text box, or into the text box where it says, yep. What's it say? It says, I got it open right here. Assignment comments. Assignment comments. Okay. So every time you're dropping that in there. Yep. Okay. There's not a shortcut. You have to actually manually click save every time you put that in there. Let's see. In Canvas. Okay. Now we're kind of getting far afield, but in Canvas, there is there's a canvancement, they're called. So there's folks can't see me. I almost jumped out of my chair. I've never heard of this before. And I don't know if you're lying to me yet. We've known each other a long time. If you're not sure that I'm lying to you or not. Canvancement. Canvancement. So there are a bunch of canvancements. They were created by James Jones, not the psychologist James Jones, but a community college instructor named James Jones. And using, how to describe it, there is an add-on for Firefox and Chrome called, one is called Tamper Monkey, another is called Grease Monkey. And what they allow you to do is write little programs or copy programs that other people like James Jones have created. And it will allow you to do things with the HTML code on a web page. So he's written several of these specifically for Canvas. And there are a handful that I use. One of which that is relevant here is that after I type in, or in my case, once I paste in, and we'll get to that, I suspect. Once I paste in my comment, there's a little arrow box. So I don't have to click submit and then click advance to the next student or use the keyboard shortcut to advance to the next student. There's just a little arrow next to the submit button. I click that, it automatically advances to the next student.
Oh, that's amazing.
Canvancement.
Okay. Well, that sounds awesome. So you have tricks within Canvas while you're grading. And, talking to students about that tiered grading reminds me of something that I learned, and I'm sure other folks have talked about it, but I remembered it specifically. Eric Landrum had this talk about 13 shades of gray or something like that, where it was when we have A plus A minus, B plus B minus, etc. That it's hard to know reliably the difference between a B minus and a C plus. And so I've started to do this bucket grading system, which is essentially, and I think you use something similar, which is exceeds a standard, meets a standard, or is below standard. You want to talk to me about what you do?
For my weekly assignments where students are answering a dozen questions, when those come in, I score the initial draft based on effort. So the initial effort is worth 20 points. It's not whether the student got the questions right or wrong. It's just, did they try to answer all the questions in the first draft? Did they make an honest attempt at it? And 20 points. So 20 exceeds expectations. They've answered all of the questions and they've fully answered all the questions. 15 points meets expectations. They didn't answer one question or two questions. They didn't answer parts of a question. 10 points, they answered about half the questions. 5 points, they answered something, like there's something relevant there. And then 0 is if they didn't submit anything or didn't do it by the deadline. And I don't try to parse that down any closer than that.
Right. Yeah. And by the way, this is off topic again, but I can't help myself. So I tried something different because I used to do almost exactly that. I tried something different this time around where I had day one be the day that those 12 questions or so are due to these guidelines. So word count minimum, attempting every question, every part of every question. But then I said, you can turn it in on Monday for a deduction. You can turn it on Tuesday for a deduction. But it all has to be there in the end. Same thing as you're doing. It's effort. It's, did you check the box? Did you work on it? Now, I know that as well, by the time that students turn in a revision to you at the end of the week, this has something to do with workload. You're not getting the first crack at it. You're not seeing student work at the beginning stages, at least when you're grading it for accuracy. That's got to help your workload a little bit.
Yeah, I don't look at that initial draft at all. Yeah. Students have a hard time understanding that because I think they have a schema. I have submitted something, therefore the instructor is going to read everything that I have submitted and is going to provide me feedback and tell me what it is I need to change. And in my framework, students are responsible for their own learning in much the same way that a student is at home studying for a test. They don't have me there saying, what you're studying here is wrong. They don't have me there for that. So just because they submit something doesn't mean I have to respond to it. I do have discussion boards set up, and when we meet face-to-face or via Zoom, students meet in live discussions, but they're talking about their responses to the questions. They're relying on each other. And if after talking with each other, there's still content they're not sure about, then they can let me know and I can do a mini lecture on it. I can provide some written material depending on the format of the course, but I can communicate with students as they need that content. But for students, their first source of information is actually each other. And I frame it to students as, if you get a new job and you have certain tasks that you have to do for this new job, and there's something that you're not sure about, you're probably going to go to your coworkers first because they're right there. And you're going to ask them, hey, how do you do this? And if they don't know, then you go to your boss, who is your professor, and you ask them. But for each little thing that you have to do, you're probably not going to your boss for that.
Yeah, this reminds me of was your article title that I referred to at the beginning, was it called Shifting Responsibility?
It was called Shifting It.
Yeah. So I love this idea because what I hear you doing is not saying I don't have responsibility as your professor. I hear you saying, I'm going to shift the responsibility here so that, so that for my own well-being and workload, but also because you know how people learn and that students must take responsibility for their learning and they don't need to be spoon-fed from their instructor, for example. And so this strategy really is about it's a bigger conversation than just faculty workload. It's where do we see the responsibility of learning taking place in a course? And I am very quick to own when I don't do something well for students. I think what the litmus test for me would be is if I have gotten in the way of you learning kind of independently or with your peers, if my instructions or my assignment or whatever has become a barrier, then that's my fault. But if you understand everything that you're supposed to do and it's within kind of what's reasonable for student workload, now I don't have a problem putting the responsibility on you for the learning.
I have a colleague who, with online discussion boards, so the students are in this online discussion and the students are talking and they're discussing whatever it is that they're discussing. This particular instructor feels the need to respond to every student's comment.
Again, almost falling out of my chair.
And to me, that instructor is tutoring every student in her class. That's what that is. It's not teaching a class, it's tutoring individual students. And I think that it's easy, especially in an online class, I think it's really easy for us to fall into that trap of essentially treating each student as an individual tutor.
Yeah. Yep. I have often thought about myself as more of a facilitator than a teacher. And although I love being a teacher of psychology, I love that. I still think about myself that way. But oftentimes, especially when I'm designing the course, and I think about how will this facilitate learning, and how will I facilitate the experience? And that is much more of a kind of what you're talking about. It's a less individual process, but it's creating a system where many can participate together in it. And that, in the end, saves me. The better you can do that, the more work-life balance I feel like you can have, because that's probably what we're ultimately talking about.
And I would totally trust that process. I have to remind myself of this periodically, but we've talked about inner teaching. And so we give these students these questions, and they're essay questions, they're applied questions. The students have to get into the textbook and apply what it is that they're learning to real life situations. And so they get in and they do this and they're wrestling with it. And I trust the process that they're going through. I trust that they're going to figure out how to answer the questions. I trust that they are going to work within their discussion groups, whatever the format, to figure out the answers to those questions. I'm going to trust my students to contact me if that is not working for them, that something is still missing. I'm going to trust them to contact me. And then in my grading, I'm going to trust my grading. I don't grade all of those essay questions when they come in the final draft. I do the initial scan of the first draft for those effort points. And then I create a rubric and score 2 questions out of the 10 or 12 or 15 questions that students answered. And it's a sampling process, but I trust the sampling process, just like I trust the rest of the learning process. The act of answering the questions is what is helping students learn the content.
Yeah. Yeah, it is a constant reminder that I need, that it's okay to build an efficient system and to sample And it's good to have actually relationships and conversations like this, because they are good reminders that the work of teaching is not responding to every discussion post. Although I don't fault that person for their desire to help every student. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about faculty workload, mental health. Right. Right. So, hey, I feel like I don't even know where we're at, but we're probably way over time, although it's the podcast. So who cares? Is there anything else you want to talk about when it comes to faculty workload and decisions related to that?
I would say that every faculty member who is grading content online needs two tools. You need a text expander, and I would recommend Phrase Express for both Windows and Mac. And I also recommend a good clipboard manager. So for Windows, I recommend Ditto, and for Macs, I recommend Copyless 2.
Talk to me about the clipboard. What did you call it?
It's a clipboard manager.
Yeah.
So for Windows, for instance, in the old Windows, you would copy something and then paste it, and then you would copy something else, and that first thing would disappear. Your clipboard that you're saving content to could only hold one item, which, when you think about it, is really pretty ridiculous.
It is, and you're about to solve a problem for me, so thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
So now I can copy things and they will sit on almost like a Word document or something like that as soon as I copy them.
Yeah, they exist inside of a little text file that takes up really no space on your computer whatsoever. And I've got Ditto on mine set up so it saves the last 1,500 things that I've copied.
Perfect.
And then when I copy 1501, then the first item on that list just rotates off.
Yeah.
And you can star some or put them into folders. I tried folders. It didn't really work for me, but you can star certain items so that they never delete. They never get rotated off. And whenever I'm grading something, if I'm grading a particular assignment, I'll type in my comment, I'll copy it, and then 3 students later, oh yeah, I need to make that exact same comment again. I don't need to retype it. What I'll do is I will just do the keyboard shortcut that calls up Ditto, and the Copyless 2 for Macs works exactly the same way. I use the keyboard shortcut. It calls up the little search box. I can just start typing a couple words from it, and it does a live search, and it'll show me everything that contains the letters that I have just typed in. And for the comments that I know that I'm going to be using repeatedly, I can sticky note them. So that way they're stuck right at the top, easy access for me to access these 3 to 5 that I'm going to be using frequently.
When they're there, is it still a process of grabbing that? It's up there, so it's available to you, grabbing that comment with a Control-C and then Control-V, pasting it in?
Not even. It's
okay.
You select it with the arrow key and hit enter, and bam, it pastes.
Lovely. That's pretty great. For Phrase Express, which I also use, do you pay for the kind of the version that you pay for, or do you use the free version?
I don't use the free version, mostly because I find Phrase Express. All right. So for the free version, you get exactly the same thing as you do for the standard version, which is the low tier pay for version. Mm-hmm. The only difference is that if Phrase Express, if their algorithm detects that you might be using some businessy kind of language, it'll start popping up nag screens where you have to wait 10 or 15 seconds before you can do whatever it is you want to do. And for me, Phrase Express worked fine in the free version, but I find it such a useful tool. I just went ahead and paid for the standard version. Yeah. And when you pay for it, you get the download now. And then if they do any updates for the next 12 months, you get that for free. But then any updates after that, then they give you a discount code and you can pay the money again. I usually wait a few versions and then pony up the money again.
Yeah. Great. All right. Well, let's put all these good things into practice and make sure we're taking care of ourselves. And Sue, thanks for talking about faculty workload.
Thank you, Garth.